Week 7 wide receiver ranks. Let's go. Kicking it off with the S tier. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jamar Chase, Nico Collins, Drake London, and Justin Jefferson. Tom, you are one of the biggest Drake London fans in the entire fantasy industry. Last week was absolutely phenomenal. 100% route share, 42.8% targets per route run, 50% target share. Okay, we're not going to see those numbers every week, but can he keep up this work where he's getting targeted insanely heavily every time he steps into the slot?
Well, the splits now are quite clear. There's, the games where he plays a decent percentage in the slot really matter. When Darnell Mooney misses out, it really matters. Also, there is a little bit favouring Michael Penix's production in home road games as well. But what is abundantly clear is that this passing game absolutely runs through Drake London. They rank second in yards per game in the NFL right now. They have been excellent. They're helped by the fact that their defense is really holding up on their end. And I just think that Drake London is showing everything that we talked about, everything that was abundantly clear before Kirk Cousins was the quarterback in Atlanta, that if you gave Drake London even bog standard production, then he was going to be able to capitalize. He was going to turn into a truly elite asset. And people who cried about how much it cost to acquire Drake London last year, they just weren't paying attention to the fact that he was an ascending star and that the price was only going to get higher because it's no easier to buy him now than it was a year ago. And people who have him are definitely more hesitant to give him up. So, yeah, Drake London, just absolutely one of my favorite players in the NFL right now. And I truly believe that he still has a chance to be a dark horse for the wide receiver 1 overall this year.
Yeah, absolutely. It just feels like the production is starting to round in. As you said, every time he goes into the slot, he's just producing. And despite the fact that he's had his bye week, he had that slow start to the year. He's currently the wide receiver 9 overall in fantasy points.
That seems good to me.
That's pretty useful. Pretty useful. And as you said, there is plenty more ceiling there as well. Moving into the B tier, we have got Rome Odunze, George Pickens, Deebo Samuel, Rashee Rice, Devontae Adams, Ladd McConkey, Brian Thomas Jr., and Jalen Waddle. We'll start with George Pickens, back-to-back ridiculous games. We've not ranked CeeDee Lamb. We're unsure whether he's going to play. It sounds like Jerry Jones is saying he could be good to go. Would that impact your George Pickens ranking significantly as Lamb does play and potentially drop him out this A tier?
I'm not sure that it'd drop Pickens out. It might push him further towards the back a little bit. But George Pickens has been phenomenal over the last few games. Like, he's really showed that his issue over the last couple of years was playing in Pittsburgh, which is absolutely fair. Like, George Pickens has had target shares of 28%, 14%, 32%. He's had 33 PPR points, 13 PPR points, and 31 PPR points. Now, he doesn't need to score 30 PPR points a week to stay in the A tier. Like, realistically, if you can get 20, then that's absolutely fine. And this game against the Commanders, which has the highest over-under of the week at 54.5, it just absolutely screams fantasy production. Neither of these teams are playing particularly great on defense right now. The Commanders have allowed the 10th most fantasy points to wide receivers. They rank 18th in pass EPA on defense, which kind of shows you it's not necessarily like just they can stop fantasy. They can stop the pass occasionally and they can do an okay job against it, but they still end up by the end of games giving up big scores. And it's more that if CeeDee Lamb's back and healthy, CeeDee Lamb will slot back into the S tier for me, and maybe George Pickens will just bump down a few.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And I think that, look, with the way Dak Prescott is playing right now, he's playing more than well enough to buoy this entire, and he can hold up to fantasy relevant wide receivers and a tight end and a running back along. I think this defense is also so bad that the Cowboys are going to have to be passing and trying to catch up and put as many points on the board. You mentioned the matchup. Next up, obviously, Deebo Samuel in that same game. Again, as we said with George Pickens, we've not ranked Terry McLaurin at the moment. Sounds like he's going to get limited practice in on Wednesday. Would that change your Deebo ranking if Terry McLaurin is active?
It would, not massively, and more like I'm just very excited for this game. Like if you're playing DFS this week and you can manage to avoid this game and this game ends up being rubbish, then you'll have huge leverage on the field because it's so difficult to ignore. Deebo tends to thrive against zone coverage. The Cowboys play the second most zone coverage. Like Deebo splits over the years have always been fantastic against zone coverage because he just finds those little spots in between the zones and then can, just absolutely exploit them because he's excellent after the catch. And this year he has been excellent after the catch after not being so last year. But Dallas, I think they could, they're bad enough on defense that it could support both Deebo and Terry McLaurin being excellent options. We haven't really seen it from McLaurin this year, the contract situation over the summer, and then, of course, the injury. But Dallas have allowed 7 touchdowns and throws 20-plus yards downfield. No other team in the NFL has allowed over 4 currently. They've allowed 7 top 24 wide receiver finishes so far. That's also a league high. And you look at how many points they've given up to wide receivers in general, and they're the most in the league. Like that, it doesn't need to be Deebo or McLaurin, but I still think I'd have more confidence in Deebo in this situation.
Yeah, definitely. I think, we've seen this year McLaurin has looked rusty because of the holdout. He's obviously now been injured. There's no way I'm slotting McLaurin in ahead of Deebo when it's first game back. I think maybe, as you said, with Pickens, I'd drop Deebo a couple of spots, but I think he well deserves his spot in this A tier. Someone who is first week back and we've slotted him in, wide receiver 10 overall in the A tier, Rashee Rice. Tom, any trepidation, nervousness around Rashee Rice first game back?
Yeah, and somebody in our Discord, which if people want to join, they can hit the join button down below. For less than like $1 or £1 a month, you get access to the Discord and a whole host of content. Like they asked this question earlier, and there was so much trepidation for me with Rashee Rice. I think since he last played, he'll have missed 23 games, including the postseason. So there's also that element of how much has the Chiefs scheme moved on from where they were massively reliant on him to the level of 30% target shares that he opened the season with last year. How much is Rashee Rice coming off a knee injury, feeling like himself? Is he able to hit the ground running? And then the fact that this is a game against the Raiders, who are consistently like a team that just, I always like refer to them as they just take the air out of games, and it can be a bit difficult to predict what's going to happen. They have allowed the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers, and it is easier to pass on them than it is to run on them. So maybe the Chiefs get going. I mean, the Chiefs have been excellent. Patrick Mahomes looks excellent. They've been 3rd in drop back success rate over the last 3 weeks. But there's definitely a level of trepidation around Rashee Rice.
Yeah, I've got plenty of Rashee Rice shares.
I know.
I'm looking forward to getting him back in those lineups, but I have to agree, I feel much more comfortable with him as my wide receiver 2 than a wide receiver 1 this week. One player we differ on massively, though, in this tier, Tom, and I'm keen to hear your thoughts. Ladd McConkey, I've got him wide receiver 8. You've got him down at wide receiver 19. I'm excited. 24% targets per route run. He seemed to be the Ladd McConkey of old. He looked sharper, he looked cleaner, and I thought, with no Quentin Johnson again this week, I'm confident in him. But you seem less confident. Why so?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always a little surprised because noted Ladd McConkey hater yourself. It's when you're in on him, it always makes me kind of reconsider. But I just think to assume after last week that Ladd McConkey is going to be the number 1 kind of option or like the best option, and that's where we've got him ranked. I'm pretty sure we've both got him ranked ahead of Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnson. Like it feels like this offense at times is going to be very difficult and it's going to be less predictable. So there's a part of that. There's a part of going, I quite like Ronde Gadsden. I'd still like Keenan Allen. If Quentin Johnson's out there, then that could be interesting. And then, of course, if you've got Trey Harris making another step, what does that look like? So the game against the Colts is definitely, one with the potential to be very fantasy relevant. It's got a 48-point over-under. The Chargers are at home, which always, for a lot of teams tends to be a bonus. The Chargers less so because we don't actually have many fans. But the Chargers, they haven't scored more than 2 touchdowns in a game since week 1 on offense, which was a stat that blew my mind when I saw that one. So there's a little bit of that going, okay, well, where's the production coming from? How often are we going to see this kind of does he need the touchdowns to get there? And the Colts, they've just been a pretty respectable defense under Lou Anarumo. They rank 18th in completion rate allowed to the slot. They haven't allowed, similarly rank 18th in yards per attempt to the slot. They've only allowed 2 touchdowns to the slot all year. And opposing quarterbacks get a 75 QBR again when throwing to the slot, which ranks 3rd worst across the league. So there's just always little bits that just make me go, yeah, I don't know, just like other guys I feel slightly better about. So I don't think he's a bad option. I do think Lad McConkey is an excellent player, but just not quite as high as yourself.
That makes a lot of sense. Before we move into the next tier of those, go ahead, hit yourself the little subscribe button down below. Why not hit the alert button while you're there and get an alert every time we're posting new videos and content and have it forced to your feed directly. Moving into the B tier, we tick it off with DK Metcalf, Chris Olave, Courtland Sutton, Tatoru McMillan, and Xavier Worthy. Tom, we've both been relatively lower than consensus on DK Metcalf. I think this is the highest we have had him ranked all year. Heading up the B tier, are you concerned that he is running pure on low volume, but week in, week out, it seems to be happening?
Yeah, well, I mean, part of it is down to DK Metcalf, and he talked about this recently, just being better after the catch. And we're seeing him consistently putting up far better yards after the catch numbers than we've ever seen throughout his career, which is really impressive for a guy kind of getting into this point in his career. He's already got 223 yards after the catch. To put that in perspective, last year he only had 263 throughout the entire season. His career high is 367. His yards after catch per reception had never been above 5.6 in a season before now, and was consistently hovering around 4.5 yards after the catch per reception. This year, he's averaging 11.7. I didn't want to draft much DK Metcalf. I still think that betting too much on this Arthur Smith passing offense isn't something I necessarily want to do, but it's kind of hard to push him down too much. And obviously, he plays Thursday night against the Bengals, who will have the 12th most wide receiver fantasy points. They rank 27th in pass defense EPA. You can't fade someone like DK Metcalf in that kind of matchup.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'd love to sit here and hate on Aaron Rodgers and DK Metcalf, but the stats aren't lying at the moment. He's had a career high yards per reception, despite having a career low ADOT. He's having his best yards per route run of his career at 2.49. He's never been above 2.1 before. He's got a career high passer rating when targeted of 137.5. He's never been above 117 before. I don't think this is sustainable. I think he's having an incredibly efficient year, and I do think that it's going to regress slightly. But at the moment, he's still a rock solid wide receiver 2 for fantasy. And I'd love to see 8-9 targets going to him. But if it only takes 4 and he's able to, as you said, produce after the catch and maybe find the end zone, it's going to be a decent day at the end of the day. So, it feels like this is where he needs to be slotted. In the C tier, we have got AJ Brown, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Devonta Smith. Tom, I've seen so much talk, so many questions in my DMs about AJ Brown. The underlying numbers look good. I'm not sure if he's pouting, if he's got an issue with Jalen Hurts, or if it's just that this offense is broken. Obviously, you've probably drafted AJ Brown as a wide receiver 1 on your fantasy team, and here we've got him down in the C tier. Are you confident that he could bounce back, or is it just he's too good, you have to start him, but you don't feel happy about it?
I'm not sure any of that really kind of makes me feel good. I think the one number, and you mentioned the underlying usage is pretty good. He's seen 8 or more targets in every game since week 1. And you wouldn't think that from the level of production and the level of kind of comments around the Eagles and the way that AJ Brown's conducted himself. Yes, we can get into whether the targets are actually any good, whether they're fantasy viable, whether they're useful. But going up against the Vikings, who are an excellent defense, coming off their bye, have allowed the fewest fantasy wide receiver points so far. And going on the road to Minnesota doesn't make me feel very good. Jalen Hurts and the Eagles in general have been awful in second halves this year. They rank 32nd in points per drive in the second half of games. They rank 32nd in EPA per play in the second half of games. So there's all these little things where you go, oh, actually, that's pretty rubbish. That's pretty rubbish. Like Jalen Hurts is throwing 10 to 19 yards downfield on only 11% of his dropbacks, according to Ben Solak. That's the lowest rate for a starter in the last 15 years. There is just no middle of the field stuff. It's like it's all check downs or it's all deep shots. And if you're going to overthrow Devonta Smith by 15 yards when you eventually do take the deep shot, then it's going to be very difficult for both AJ Brown or Devonta Smith to live in a higher tier than this.
Yeah, maybe I'm a hater. It feels like everybody's looking around for what's going wrong in Philadelphia. What's the issue? The issue is Jalen Hurts isn't a very good quarterback. He's fantastic for fantasy. He's a phenomenal rushing quarterback, but he is not a functional NFL quarterback.
Well, I think there's that. And there's also the new offensive coordinator who you go back to Jalen Hurts' comments after Kellen Moore was hired for the Saints. And like you watch the videos and he was like, yeah, well, you know, he doesn't have any experience whatsoever in the NFL calling plays, but I'm excited for him to have this opportunity. But the look on his face just looked so miserable about it, going from Kellen Moore to a guy who'd never called plays. And I think that's part of it. Like he has to design more stuff, which is forcing Jalen Hurts' hands.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But at the end of the day, you're then expecting Jalen Hurts to sit in the pocket and read it out. And that's something he struggled to do throughout his entire career. If you've got any questions, though, if you are agonizing over those start-sit decisions, if you are trying to pull the trigger on a trade and can't quite decide whether you should or not, drop it in the comments below and Tom and I will answer 100% of those questions all the way up to kickoff on Sunday. In the D tier, we've got Michael Pittman, Jordan Addison, Wan'Dale Robinson, Kendrick Bourne, Romeo Doubs, Jacoby Myers, DJ Moore, and T. Higgins. Tom, Wan'Dale Robinson produced like a wide receiver 1 for the Giants last week. Are you expecting that to continue, or do you think that he will relegate himself back into his slot-heavy wide receiver 3 role whilst there's other receiving weapons that could be getting fit and you're coming back like Darius Slayton?
Yeah, it was kind of a weird game last week for the Giants in general, on many, many levels. But at wide receiver, seeing little Jordan Humphrey tying for a 26.9% target share was not something I had on my bingo card. Jalen Hyatt getting a 19% target share. So it wasn't like it was all Wan'Dale Robinson. Like Wan'Dale Robinson this year, the usage has been kind of interesting. Sometimes we're seeing him further downfield than we used to. Sometimes it's very much just difficult to predict what we're going to get. But this week, I kind of feel fine in this range. Like, look, if you've lost Ravens, if you've lost Bills players and you need to plug someone in, and you look at the matchup with the Broncos, where is it you want to avoid? You want to avoid the perimeter. You don't want to be matching up with Patrick Surtain. Wan'Dale Robinson is not really going to play in the perimeter, is he? So, like, maybe he can be the outlet across the middle of the field and do okay when the blitz-heavy Broncos are sending, fire at Jackson Dart. He can be the outlet.
Maybe. I'm not sure I fully believe it. But, the one player I do want to touch on briefly as well, Kendrick Bourne. We've seen it looking like Ricky Pearsall may not play. He's not practicing on Wednesday when we are recording this. Juwan Jennings has got, in inverted commas, 5 broken ribs and may be traded at any point. But Kendrick Bourne has been balling out with Mac Jones under center. Do you think that could continue with Brock Purdy returning this week?
Well, he's had 142 yards in both of his last 2 games, Kendrick Bourne. That's absurd. I can't imagine anybody has ever landed on exactly the same amount of receiving yards at that high ever again, in the past. So, yeah, the usage is fantastic, averaging 10 targets per game. Now, you throw in Brock Purdy and you have a quarterback change. What do things look like? Atlanta are first in single high coverage, but we know they play the way that they want to. They've been an excellent defense this year. They rank 5th in EPA pass defense per dropback, and they've allowed very few fantasy points to anyone across the board. They've allowed the 5th fewest to the quarterback position, the 2nd fewest to running backs, the 6th fewest to wide receivers, and the fewest to tight ends. So there's nobody I really feel amazing about in the San Francisco offense, and I really do respect this Atlanta defense. But I mean, if you need to play Kendrick Bourne, I feel okay about it, but I wouldn't expect him to carry on the tear he's been on.
Yeah, happy as a wide receiver 3, a little bit nervous if it's anything more than that. In the E tier, we have got Jameson Williams, Matthew Golden, Rashid Shaheed, Trey Tucker, Sterling Shepard, Josh Downs, Jawan Jennings, and Cooper Kupp. Tom, I called Jameson Williams a sell in this week's Dynasty Buys and Sells video. Are you nervous, given the matchup, given the boom week last week, that it could be a lower production week this week?
Yeah, I think it's almost certainly going to be a lower production week this week, because when you look at Jameson Williams' career, and we've got a pretty large sample now. I think what he's played. He's played 40 games in the regular season as well as 4 playoff games, and he's only had 2 games where he's ever seen 6 targets, with one of them coming last week. For a player who's labeled as boom or bust, he doesn't actually boom that high, and it's quite often more bust than boom. And I definitely bought in on Jameson Williams this offseason, but now we're looking at this season and saying 7 targets, 6 receptions for 66 yards and a touchdown is a really good result. He's only been over 44 yards on 2 occasions. He's only got the 2 touchdowns this year, and it just feels like what we hoped for him. More involved. That was what the Lions said all offseason, that he was involved in everything and he looked incredible and he was ready to take the step. Now, against the Bucs, sure, I believe that he can probably have a good game, but it feels foolish to try and rely on that. The Bucs have been susceptible to the pass at times, so maybe if the Lions are struggling to get the run game going against the Bucs, we know we're very good against the run, then maybe they do have to turn to the pass. But I'm always going to feel more confident about Sam Laporta and Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the boom bust thing, Jameson Williams had 2 games over 15 fantasy points, an 18.8 and an 18.6. Not exactly a massive boom. And then he's had 4 games where he hasn't produced more than 7 points. It's low floor, medium ceiling, and it's just not what you'd particularly want given the price.
Yeah, and we're also seeing, we saw Isaac Tesla out there running more routes than he's done all year as well. Yes, he didn't get anything in the way of targets, but it's thin ice for Jameson Williams.
Yeah, absolutely. And our final tier, we have got Ilika Umanor, Marquise Brown, Travis Hunter, Troy Franklin, Jerry Jeudy, Kayshon Boutte, and Christian Kirk. Tom, Kayshon Boutte starting to break out, dare I say it? Are you maybe we're a little bit low, and could it be happening?
Maybe. I mean, look, the Patriots are favored by 7 on the road going into Tennessee. This is a matchup where you probably want to be starting some of the ancillary players, the ones who maybe don't always get there. Like last week's game, we saw Pop Douglas and Boutte get there, and it wasn't Hunter Henry and it wasn't Stephon Diggs. So it hurt us for fantasy, and it hurt us expecting that we might be able to lean into just a narrow target tree. But this can only be good for Drake May. It just makes me feel better about him. Tennessee have been fairly good against wide receivers in terms of fantasy points because their games don't see a lot of points. They rank 24th in pass defense EPA, but they rank 16th in fantasy points allowed to the position. And that's reflected in the over-under of this game being at 42 because the Titans don't tend to score many points. And even though I think Mike Vrabel still has some bad blood with Tennessee, I'm not sure we see him completely run up the score to the level where this one gets crazy.
No, absolutely. I think this could be a really interesting game, and I'm very much looking forward to the handshake and Mike Vrabel's actions at the end of it. Just to touch on Kayshon Boutte, I've got him as wide receiver 38. You've got him as wide receiver 58. So I think that probably says how much more confident I am in his role in this offense and what he could be than you are this week. But that is it. On your way out, make sure you're hitting that hype, that thumbs up, and of course the subscribe button. And make sure you're checking out these other videos that we have released this week.